Hey everybody, it's Matt Robinson. Welcome to another edition of the Writer's Block. I gotta tell you folks, I love this job. Meeting interesting people, talking to you out there, it's really great. Unfortunately, as we all know, not everyone has such fulfilling work, and that's why I'm so excited to have our guest on today's show. Jen Tosti-Kharas is the Camilla Latino Spinelli Endowed Term Chair and Professor of Management at Babson, where she teaches organizational behavior and leadership. She also conducts research and offers coaching about what it means to craft a meaningful career. Before landing at Babson, Jen worked as a strategy consultant at Accenture in the communications, media, and entertainment industries. She appeared as a contestant on Cash Cab, and talking about meaningful work, she has officiated a marriage. In her book, Is Your Work Worth It? How to Think About Meaningful Work, Jen and her fellow researcher and meaningful work seeker, Christopher Michelson, discuss what it means to find value in your work and the difference it can make in terms of productivity and longevity. I'm honored to have one of my favorite neighbors here. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Matt, thank you so much. It's fun to talk to you about something that's not about living, very close to you.
Well, I'll try to keep it down from now on. Sorry about that. Anyway, the book is fabulous. As someone who's kind of cobbled together a career, I really related to, I've been fortunate to have found a number of things that bring me joy and that help me do my part around the house. So, but as we said, not everyone has that. So I definitely want to get into, your tips. But first of all, let's set our terms. How do you define work and what is the meaning of work?
Yeah, great question. I've attended conferences where we've spent more time than we should trying to figure out what do we mean when we say work. So in the book, we say that work is something that you do that meets three conditions. It's effortful, it requires effort. It's purposeful, it serves a purpose, there's some point to it. And this is probably the most important one, it's recognized by society as work. So this is what separates housework, for example, which we all know is a lot of work, or childcare or things like that, from what we typically recognize in society as paid employment.
Do you try to argue that the more domestic occupations deserve to be in the same category?
I think that what's interesting is, so I think they should be in some regard because we consider them to be work if we pay someone else to clean our house or watch our kids. But when we do it ourselves, we don't consider it, and I think there are some gendered reasons, why that might be. Work in the home, traditionally women's work. But at the same time, I think when we talk, a lot of the concepts that we talk about in the book really are explicitly talking about paid employment. So I think also definitionally, that's why we sort of went that way.
Are there some jobs or categories of jobs that are inherently valuable and rewarding, or does it really depend on the person and their aptitudes and vocations?
Yeah, so I wrote this book, as you mentioned, with Christopher Michelson, and so he is a philosopher and business ethicist, and I am an organizational psychologist. So if you're asking me, it's all up to the individual. So in other words, you and I could do the exact same job title, same organization, obviously same industry, and you feel your work is deeply meaningful, it's a huge part of who you are, you would, continue to do it even if you weren't paid, things like that. And for me, it's a paycheck. For me, I don't think about work when I go home at the end of the day. And so research has found, including my own research, highly subjective differences in terms of how people view their work. But what Christopher would say as the philosopher is, but there are some objective factors of work that make it more meaningful. So there are things like being a terrorist. So we talk a lot about the 9/11 attacks in the book and what those did to make people seek meaningful work. And so terrorists, for example, think their work is deeply meaningful, but we wouldn't encourage it, right? We wouldn't say that's meaningful work that we want to hold up. So often meaningful work in terms of objective characteristics helps others, makes the world a better place, gives back to society in some way, sort of does a net good in the world.
Well, I think that goes back to the earlier point about domestic work and how it really does check those boxes, but isn't always perceived in the same realm.
Yeah. Right, absolutely right.
What can help make a job more rewarding and worthwhile? Like if it's something that at first you don't really have a passion for, what sort of behaviors and strategies might you use to to make it more part of your life?
Yeah, so we talk in the book about things individuals can do and things organizations can do. So what individuals can do is a practice that's been talked about as job crafting. So you can change either what it is that you're doing or who it is that you're doing it with to sort of make the work more meaningful. And again, that may just be about more meaningful to you. Like, I really like working with Matt. I'm not sure about this other person. How can I sort of subtly shift that I'm doing more work with Matt and less work with this other person that, really brings me down? I can maybe change so that I'm doing more of the work I really love, in terms of tasks and less of the work I don't. And then in terms of organizations, a huge part of it is helping people see the impact of their work. So something that Christopher and I like to say is no job feels meaningful every day. There's lots of necessary evils, and my own work as a professor, the grading, some of the committee work, you're like, ugh, this is not why I joined this profession, and I think a lot of jobs have that. So it doesn't need to feel meaningful every single moment of every day, and no job will. But I think seeing the ultimate impact, even if it's a few steps removed, how does my work, let's take my work in this office, plugging away at my spreadsheets, ultimately help either my organization fulfill some noble mission in society, or help maybe sometimes talking to the end users, the customers, whoever it is that's sort of interacting at the end point of the work that really benefits from it, can really give people the sense that what they're doing matters.
Yeah, when I'm teaching the residents at the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office, I do the entrepreneur class, and I tell them straight out, it's like, the last 3 days of the month are not fun because it's billing and chasing invoices, and it's not the work, but it's necessary to be able to do the work. And it's entrepreneurship is not all fun and glitz and glamour. There's a lot of digging in that needs to be done, especially at the beginning. So,
but talk about meaningful work, teaching in a facility. I mean, that's amazing.
That's been great. So how did you come to your line of work?
Yeah, so I started getting into this topic, as many PhD students do. I started my PhD program in management, in organizational psychology. That was my focus. And I was lucky enough to be paired up with an advisor who this is what she studied. So my advisor, Amy Resneski, she was at NYU at the time, as was I, later went on to Yale, and now is at Wharton School. But she coined this sort of typology about thinking of work as a job, career, or a calling. So a job is I'm in it for the money, basically. It's sort of just a job. I leave it at work when I go home for the day. A career is more about advancement within some kind of, I'm climbing the corporate ladder or something like that. And then a calling is really where it's deeply meaningful work, and it's kind of inseparable. My work and life are kind of inseparable. I'm sort of consumed by the work I do. It's deeply meaningful, and I think about it a lot. And so I really loved this line of research. In particular, I got really kind of obsessed with this idea that work could be a calling. And not just a calling from a higher power, but really could be a meaningful part of people's lives. And that's been my career ever since, is trying to understand how does work either contribute to the sense that our lives are worth living and are good lives, or how does it take away from that feeling?
What do you think about the idea of going on parallel tracks, like having your paycheck job, but then getting up at 4 a.m. to write your book, or run your not-for-profit, or can that really work authentically long term? Or
absolutely, and I think a lot of people are doing that. So by the way, nothing is to say your calling has to be fulfilled at work. I think a lot of people do work for the paycheck to service their callings outside, whatever that looks like, writing, music, arts, etc. So nothing wrong with that. No, I think that's a valuable, in terms of being worthy or worthwhile in terms of life as a whole, I think that's equally sort of noble and understandable. And I think just a lot of people, the way the economy is constructed and sort of job availability in a certain area or in a certain field, I just think the practical fact is a lot of people structure their lives like that.
How did the change to doing to teaching and supporting others, how did that come about for you?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I was working as a management consultant. That was my first job, undergraduate business major, first job straight out of college. And I think like a lot of people in their first job, I just looked up the career ladder at my firm, and I couldn't see myself making partner one day. I just didn't want to do the work that would require. I also, by the way, I joined right around the time of 2000 .com boom and bust. So I got to see that cycle of people gaining work, losing work, being laid, and we had mass layoffs at my firm. And I just became obsessed with this notion of, how do people manage their careers? How do they manage their work lives? I didn't yet know about meaningful work and sort of that area, but I just love this idea of studying careers. And then now at Babson, where I'm a professor, I'm really fortunate. I teach a class called Crafting a Meaningful Career. So it's really come full circle where now I'm teaching both my undergraduates and my graduate students about, I just want them to stop and think about why they're doing the work they're doing. We tend to do it in COVID, or we tend to do it after 9/11. Like, big tragedies make us think like that. But absent that, we just don't tend to stop and think. Like, is this really what I want to be doing? Am I getting out of it what I want? And questions like that. So the teaching it, so for me, so when I think about my own work, right, it's the interactions with students. I see them as, I talked about like the end user, the end person who benefits. They're my end person who benefits. And so interacting with them is like the best part of my job and why I do the work I do.
As a researcher.
Which you can understand, right? Because you're also a teacher.
I teach, and that absolutely, that's always been a major part of what I do, and I'm fortunate to have had the experiences I've had. As an academic and a researcher, you had reason to be asking questions towards this book. Did any of your colleagues ever get suspicious as why is she asking so much about whether I love what I do?
This is such a great question. It's almost interesting, I think, that this doesn't come up that much. Like, actually, people don't ask that question as much as you would think they would. So no, I don't think anyone has ever So on my end, as an academic, as a professor, I think no one has ever asked that, in part because people are like, oh yeah, that is an interesting question for sort of like scholarly inquiry or for people to think about. People are a little more open to ideas. Where that question becomes relevant and gets a little funny is when I'm talking to companies, as I sometimes do in executive education or as a coach or consultant. So if a company were to hire me to talk about the ideas in this book, for example, the natural conclusion for some employees should be that they should leave, right? Like, they should no longer do the work that this company. So in other words, I don't have this is not a magic key to retaining all employees or improving commitment to the organization or other things organizations might want. But I would argue in counter to that, that it's more important to retain the employees who actually are the right employees, the employees who really fit, the employees who really feel this could be a job worth growing in and developing in, and a job that could be meaningful to them. And actually, the ones who would leave if posed with these questions are the ones you don't want anyway. But I have noticed in my coaching and consulting that sometimes it's like, well, why are you making them ask this question, right? like, how does this benefit me as an organization? And so that's the version of your question that I see most often.
Are there any companies that you've gone to and been like, do you see a mismatch sometimes right off between the employees and the corporate
yes.
culture?
No, absolutely. They shall remain nameless, but like absolutely that is a thing. That is a thing that happens because a lot of companies, or the other way companies go with this, that could have been an answer to one of your earlier questions about how do you make work meaningful. A lot of companies try to artificially basically fake it, right? They're like, we're going to create some good sounding purpose statement, or we're going to do some nominal things that like make employees feel like the work matters, where we're really trying to do like maybe not the most noble ends for society, right? There are companies like that out there. So, that always kind of also is a red flag.
Like kind of a corporate cultural greenwashing?
Exactly right, yeah.
They talk about how they're doing one thing, but it's really such a minor part of.
Which is why when you look at some of these purpose, so-called purpose statements, they seem almost comical.
Yeah.
Not always, right? But not always. But that's something that I talk to students about is like, how do you tell if a company is like living its values, right? I mean, what markers would you look for?
So you had written and researched this general topic extensively and done academic writing on it. This is more of a general populist type book. What were some of the major differences you noticed in the process of crafting it?
Oh my gosh, everything was different. So I've written, a lot and researched a lot and even published with Christopher a fair amount on this topic. And writing for academic audiences and writing for popular audiences could not be more different. So we really had to unlearn how to write. in a very real way. We were fortunate enough, we worked with a fabulous agent, and he actually did a lot of the unlearning. So he coached us a lot on just how to, not speak in jargon, not be scientific, not be pedagogical. That was a huge thing we were doing. We were lecturing to people, and we didn't even know it. We lecture for a living, right? We lead students A to B to C. He's like, I'm an adult reading this book. I don't want to be lectured to. So that was a tension. How do you develop the arguments, make people feel like you're telling them something that's worth knowing without lecturing or without patronizing or being too scientific? That was the hardest part of writing this book. But we did sort of draft after draft of our proposal until we got it right. And then at that point, we switched to our editor, who was equally fabulous in helping us just figure out what's the tone, who's the audience, who do we really want to talk to, and how can we do that most effectively. The other thing we did for the book that was a bit new was we just talked to working people from a variety of walks of life, and we tried to sample on, in research you sometimes sample at the extremes, but not always, but here we really tried to look at who are people who in some way have just an amazing story, just a story worth telling about meaningful work, and that was so fun.
Yeah. That's the same thing with my writing. Is those are the stories I love, the fresh stories, the real story. I found it incredible. Not just because I'm kind of the gig economy before it was cool, and have been fortunate enough to cobble together enough things of meaning, but the book, it just was zipped right through it. And because of this show, I get so many books in the mail. I rarely ever finish one. This was like 2 sittings. So high praise. I really enjoyed it, and still got a lot out of it. And I think that people will, even if you've been thinking about making a switch, it's a great signpost to kind of check in and say, am I not getting what I need? Can I legitimately get it somewhere else? Because it can be scary to take that leap.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And thank you, Matt. That means a lot. Coming from a fellow writer, that's like that, the highest praise.
So speaking of writer, how did you and Christopher find each other?
So we met at a conference. Believe it or not, there are conferences on meaningful work and studying what work means. And we met at a tiny conference that was organized around that. Again, we come from different disciplines, but at the time we shared an institution. So I was a PhD student at NYU Stern School of Business, and Christopher was actually adjunct teaching there, which he still does to this day, actually, in their business and society program. So. Then, we met, and then it was a couple years before we started working together, and Christopher had this idea to analyze the New York Times Portraits of Grief, which were created to memorialize the victims of 9/11, and to read those portraits to see was work mentioned, and if so, how? Like, how did work seem to fit in these tragically completed lives? And I just thought that was the coolest idea for research I had ever heard. Actually, so novel, so interesting. And then that's how that was the beginning.
So you said there are conferences on this topic. There are also, as far as long back as I can remember, going back to What Color Is Your Parachute, there have been books about how to put together your passions and your proclivities and what the marketplace is asking for. How do you think your book is different?
So the typical, I would say, career book, business book is sort of formulaic, and again, these are books I've read, I love, I teach them, so I don't mean to criticize, but they can be formulaic and they can be prescriptive. So often they tell you exactly how to do it, you step 1, step 2, step 3, and you'll find meaningful work. And there are a lot of books out there that promise meaningful work or promise what will happen if you, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, things like that are just making these really grand promises. And this book is not that. So this book does not pretend to give easy answers to these questions, because there are no easy answers, Matt. I mean, you know that, right? There are no easy answers to do these 3 things and your work will be a calling, or with these ingredients you'll find meaningful work. And nor do we wish to prescribe that everyone should feel their work is meaningful. Like we talked about, you could find meaning outside of work, and work is a means to an end, and that's okay. The goal of the book is really to equip people to figure out am I getting what I want out of work? Whatever that is. Like, we're very agnostic to what that could be. And I think that's a huge difference. It's something when we were getting, blurb quotes for the back of the book, for the book cover, that's something people picked up on right away. Like, it's all about asking questions, and it's not about this illusion that we're providing people with simple answers.
Well, I think the diversity of the subjects in the book, it was easy to kind of latch on, see yourself in one of the stories, if not more than one, and then figure out what's similar, what's different, where am I versus where they were, et cetera.
Yeah, we hope so.
Absolutely. So we talked about how the book was sort of, for lack of a better phrase, inspired by 9/11.
Yeah.
What changes did you see during the pandemic that affected how people looked at the meaningfulness of their daily pursuits?
I mean, events like 9/11 and COVID just remind us of our own mortality. They're really hard in that way, right? We tend, it's sort of, we all know we are going to die one day, but we don't walk around thinking about it, or we couldn't live, right? So we somehow manage that balance, cognitive balancing act every single day. And then events like COVID, and especially COVID, right? Because every person could think, wow, this could really, I could be a victim of this. So that's why we saw things like the Great Resignation. Suddenly people left their jobs en masse that probably wouldn't have in the absence of a global pandemic that, hit right to the heart of my days could be limited, so am I spending them the way that I want? And I think it really shone a light on industries. The restaurant industry is an obvious one. Healthcare industry obviously took a massive hit. Education, that we weren't necessarily like serving the employees of these industries well. And so it almost, in hindsight, it wasn't surprising that so many people sought different careers. But again, I think in the absence of COVID, you just sort of stick with the status quo and go about, life as usual. And these are the events that really make you stop in your tracks and reconsider everything. And I guess not to sound overly ambitious or grandiose, but our hope for this book might be that this book lets you ask these big questions in the absence of a major crisis.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, is that this book seems like a really kind of a safe world in which to at least explore these things without, without a gun to your head, so to speak.
Exactly.
So looking at your own career, how you did the thing, you were the consultant on the ground with one of the biggest companies and best companies that does it.
Yep.
Found your way to helping younger people find their way, and now helping potentially all people find their way.
Yeah.
What do you hope to be able to say about your own career when you decide to go on to whatever the next step is?
I know. Obviously, this is something it's hard not to ask this own question about yourself as you're doing this. I think it's that. I hope that through my work, people will ask the big questions, the big why, right? Sort of, why am I doing this work? Am I getting out of it what I wanted? And if not, then what do I do next? Like, to me, that would be the ultimate legacy, is just to get people to ask those big questions and not to ever feel stuck or trapped, or like work or life are meaningless, because that would be terrible, right? So that's, and the legacy, whether it's through students or through readers of this book or people listening right now, right? I think that would be the ultimate.
Is there, I know you don't want the book to be formulaic, but was there sort of one kind of tip or piece of advice that came up more than most that you could leave people with?
Well, I would just hope that people could feel empowered, that they have more choice than they think they do. So whether that's choice around leaving and finding something new, often it doesn't need to be a radical career pivot. It could just be sort of like what I talked about with job crafting, a very subtle change, even in the same job, same organization, same role, but that would really make a difference. And I think if you don't stop to ask the question, you can never make a change. So I would just want to empower people to be asking those kinds of questions, and then feeling like they can make changes that matter, even if they're small. Sure, I'd love to see people making, giant ambitious career pivots and it working out for them, but even a small tweak could matter a lot. So I just want people to think, holistically about what they're doing, their impact, and how things could be better.
Right. Well, because even the small change today can lead on to completely
exactly.
different choices. So
Exactly.
Yeah. Again, that's what I really enjoyed about the book, is that it really felt like a safe sandbox to here's something I've always been thinking about doing. Can I really make it work? What can I put aside to do it? What will I need to put aside to do it?
Yeah.
And and can I see that life working out?
Yeah.
As a freelancer, this is kind of my everyday. Always, do I do billing now, or do I propose something else, or do I work on an old assignment, or do I clean the bathroom? Do I do the domestic work? That's important too.
No, exactly.
As we started.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people's day jobs, if you will, are looking more like that kind of freedom and flexibility, which is a good thing.
Right. Yeah. So let's hope that we can continue the positive trend without the negative elements that may have sparked a lot of people to look down that road. And again, this is a great guide and a great conversation. Thanks, Jen, for being on the show. It's a fabulous book. Is your work worth it? Please check it out. Whether or not you've been pondering a change, who knows what may come of it. I loved it. I found a lot to it. There's a lot of great stories, and I happen to know the author, and you couldn't find a better guide. So enjoy the book, and thanks for joining us again on the show. See you soon.